The price of knowledge. The royal archives existed in a space that defied the palace's usual grandeur, where the throne room gleamed with polished marble and the council chambers boasted stained glass windows that caught the morning light. The archives descended into older stone, darker passages, and air that tasted of centuries. Cassian's footsteps echoed against walls that predated the current dynasty by generations. The iron ring on his finger pulsed with each step, responding to ley lines that ran through these depths like veins of liquid shadow. He could feel them pulling southward, always southward, toward the Shadow Veil wastes and whatever hungry thing waited there. Section 7, subsection 12. Archmage Verena's words repeated in his mind like an incantation. The door, when he found it, was unremarkable. Plain oak bound with iron, no different from a dozen others he'd passed. But the ward glyphs etched into the frame made his teeth ache. Restriction magic, binding spells designed to keep something contained, or someone out. He pressed his palm against the wood. The wards recognized Verena's authorization, reluctantly parting like oil on water. The door swung inward on silent hinges. The chamber beyond was smaller than he'd expected, perhaps 20 feet square, with walls lined floor to ceiling with books and scrolls that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. A single reading table occupied the center, its surface scarred with burns and stains that might have been ink or might have been something darker. Cassian stepped inside. The door closed behind him with a sound like a tomb ceiling. The texts on the lowest shelves bore titles in languages he recognized from his academy studies. Theoretical applications of inverse thaumaturgy, a treatise on magical reversal, academic works, scholarly and dry. But as his eyes traveled upward, the titles grew more disturbing. The Unmaking Arts, Principles of Soul Severance, Blood and Binding, a Practical Guide. On the highest shelf, barely visible in the dim light cast by enchanted sconces, sat a series of volumes bound in something that looked disturbingly like human skin. He forced himself to look away, to focus on the middle shelves where the texts seemed less immediately horrifying. His fingers traced spines until they found what he was looking for. Foundational Principles of Anathema-class Workings. The book was heavier than it looked. When he opened it, the pages seemed to writhe in the dim light, the text shifting and reforming as if alive. He had to concentrate to make the words hold still long enough to read. The first principle, all magic extracts a price. Conventional thaumaturgy draws upon external sources, ley lines, ambient magical energy, prepared reagents. The practitioner remains separate from the working, a conduit rather than a component. Anathema-class magic acknowledges no such separation. The practitioner becomes the source. Flesh, spirit, and will are transmuted into raw power. The price is not paid to the magic, but by the magic, extracted from the very substance of the caster's being. Cassian's hands trembled as he turned the page. Diagrams showed human figures with lines radiating outward from their cores, each line labeled with terms he'd never encountered in academy texts. Soul threads, essence channels, the infrastructure of the self, mapped and measured like ley lines on a chart. The second principle, corruption is inevitable, but not immediate. Each casting creates microscopic fractures in the practitioner's spiritual architecture. These fractures accumulate, weakening the boundaries between self and magic, until eventually the distinction ceases to exist. He thought of the chamber Verena had shown him, the mage whose crystallized remains still clutched at wards that had failed 3 centuries ago. That was what happened when the boundaries collapsed entirely, the self consumed by its own power, transformed into something neither human nor purely magical. But before that final transformation, what happened? How long did a mage have before the corruption became irreversible? The book offered no comfort. Duration varies by individual constitution, strength of will, and frequency of practice. Some practitioners show visible signs within days. Others maintain apparent normalcy for months before catastrophic failure. Cassian set the book down, his heart hammering against his ribs. He could feel the ley lines beneath the palace, could trace their flow toward the Shadow Veil. In his mind's eye, he saw the shadow spawn they'd destroyed 3 nights ago, watched its corrupted essence flow along damaged magical channels to feed something vast and terrible. How many more attacks could the kingdom withstand? How many more nights before the Voidweaver broke free entirely? He reached for another volume. Practical Applications of Life Force Transmutation. The title alone made him nauseous, but he forced himself to open it, to read the careful instructions for converting one's own vitality into magical power. The process was elegant in its horror. A simple modification to standard casting techniques, replacing external power sources with internal ones. The diagrams showed how to tap into one's own life force, how to burn years of potential existence in exchange for immediate magical strength. And it worked. The text included testimonials from practitioners who'd used these techniques to accomplish feats impossible through conventional means. A mage who'd held off an army single-handedly, another who'd sealed a dimensional breach that would have swallowed a city. Heroes. All of them. Most had died within a year of their great workings. Gods, Cassian whispered. His voice sounded hollow in the small chamber. He spent hours there, reading until his eyes burned and his head throbbed with forbidden knowledge. The texts built on each other, each more terrible than the last. Techniques for binding spirits to one's will. Methods for drawing power from the dying. Rituals that required components he refused to contemplate. But interwoven with the horror was possibility. These magics could do what conventional thaumaturgy could not. They could reach into the fabric of reality itself and reshape it. They could stand against forces that fed on structured spells and grew stronger from traditional magic. They could stop the Voidweaver, maybe, if the practitioner survived long enough to complete the working. If the corruption didn't transform them into something worse than the threat they sought to prevent. If. Cassian closed the last book with shaking hands. Dawn light was creeping through cracks in the chamber's ceiling, thin streams of gold that seemed obscene in this place of shadow and secrets. He'd been here all night, drinking in knowledge that could save the kingdom or damn it, or both. He stood, legs stiff from hours of sitting. As he turned toward the door, something caught his eye. A scroll case on a corner shelf, partially hidden behind larger volumes. Unlike the other texts, this one was marked with fresh wax seals. Recent, then. Not ancient forbidden knowledge, but something contemporary. He pulled it free, broke the seal. The scroll inside was covered in cramped handwriting he recognized from academy lectures and official reports. Archmage Verena's hand. To whoever reads this, if you have come this far, you already know the weight of the choice before you. I cannot make that choice for you. I can only tell you what I have learned in 60 years of studying what should not be studied. The Voidweaver is not simply a creature of corrupt magic. It is corruption itself, the price that magic demands made manifest. When the founding mages sealed it 3 centuries ago, they did not imprison an external threat. They imprisoned the accumulated cost of generations of magical practice. Every shortcut taken, every price left unpaid, every consequence deferred. The wards are failing because the debt has grown too large. The Voidweaver feeds on our magic because it is our magic, come due. To fight it with conventional methods is to feed it further. Each spell cast, each ward raised, only adds to the debt. This is why traditional magic fails against shadow spawn. They are manifestations of unpaid magical cost, and structured spells are simply more fuel for their growth. Anathema-class magic offers a different path. By paying the price immediately, by making the practitioner both source and cost, these workings create no debt for the Voidweaver to feed upon. They are self-contained transactions, terrible but complete. If you choose this path, know that you will be called monster, traitor, heretic. The kingdom will hunt you even as you save it. And if you succeed, if you somehow manage to stand against the Voidweaver and survive, you will carry scars that never heal. But you will have paid the price yourself rather than passing it to those who come after. Choose wisely. Choose quickly. We have less time than anyone knows. Cassian read the scroll 3 times, each word burning itself into his memory. Then he carefully rolled it up, replaced it in its case, and returned it to the shelf. He left the archives as dawn broke fully over Thornhaven. The palace was stirring, servants beginning their rounds, guards changing shifts, the machinery of governance grinding slowly to life. He passed them like a ghost, his mind still trapped in that small chamber of forbidden knowledge. Elena was waiting outside his apartment. She'd been leaning against the wall, but straightened when she saw him, her green eyes searching his face. "You look terrible," she said. Not an accusation, just observation. "I didn't sleep. I know, I came by around midnight. You weren't here." She paused. "Where were you?" He could lie, should lie. But when he opened his mouth, what came out was, "The Royal Archives, Section 7. Her face went pale. "Cassian, I know what I need to do," he said. The words felt distant, as if someone else was speaking them. "I know what it will cost." "Then you know you can't." "Can't what? Let the kingdom fall? Watch the Voidweaver break free and consume everything we've built?" His voice was rising. He forced it back down. "Elena, conventional magic won't work. We've seen that. Every spell we cast just feeds it. We need something different. Something forbidden," she said flatly. "Something that pays its own price." She stared at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, "And what happens to you? After you've paid that price?" He thought of the crystallized mage in the chamber. Thought of the testimonials in the texts, heroes who'd burned themselves to ash in single, desperate workings. Thought of Verena's warning, "You will carry scars that never heal." "I don't know," he admitted, "but I know what happens if I do nothing." Elena's hand found his, her fingers cold against his palm. "Then we find another way. We research. There is no other way." The certainty in his voice surprised him. The founding mages tried. They had the best minds of their generation, unlimited resources, and they couldn't destroy the Voidweaver. They could only seal it, and that seal is breaking. "So what are you going to do?" He looked down at their joined hands, at the iron ring on his finger that pulsed with the rhythm of dying ley lines, at the woman who'd been his rival and his friend and something he'd never quite had the courage to name. "I'm going to learn," he said. "I'm going to study every text in that archive until I understand exactly what I'm dealing with. And then," he swallowed hard, "then I'm going to do what needs to be done." A bell tolled somewhere in the palace. The morning council session, calling the kingdom's leaders to another day of denying the obvious, of pretending that traditional solutions would somehow prove sufficient. Elena's grip on his hand tightened. "I'm not letting you do this alone. I can't use forbidden magic, no. But I can watch your back. I can help you research. I can," her voice cracked slightly, "I can remind you who you are when the darkness gets too deep." He wanted to refuse. Wanted to push her away, to keep her safe from the path he was choosing. But the truth was, he needed her. Needed someone who would see him as something more than a necessary sacrifice or a dangerous heretic. Needed someone who would remember the man he'd been before the corruption took hold. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay." They stood there as the palace woke around them, two young mages balanced on the edge of a precipice, knowing that the next step would change everything, and unable to see any other path forward. Somewhere south, beyond the city walls, beyond the failing wards and the corrupted ley lines, something ancient and terrible sensed the shift, sensed the moment when idealism gave way to desperate pragmatism, when a bright young mage took his first real step toward darkness. And the Voidweaver smiled, if such a thing could be said to smile, because it knew what Cassian was only beginning to understand. The forbidden magic he would wield against it had been forged in the same fires that had birthed the Voidweaver itself. The weapon he was becoming was made of the same substance as the enemy he meant to fight, and in the end, there might be no difference between them at all.